It happened in under 10 seconds, but it changed everything. Lisa reached up quietly, no build-up, no drama, and just took off her wig. It was the most human thing, simple, unfiltered, and for one moment she looked relieved, free even. But that peace didn't last. Not even for a breath, because the second Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, his whole face changed. The fake smile cracked, his eyes darted away, then right back again, like he was scanning damage. His jaw clenched. Nothing was said, but everything was said. She saw it. We saw it. And she knew. Then he spoke. Not to reassure her, not to say she looked beautiful or ask how she felt, but to question why she didn't tell him first. Then came the kicker. You should have asked me before doing that. As if her hair, her scalp, her vulnerability needed management approval. As if her natural self required clearance. The temperature in the room dropped so fast, it gave viewers whiplash. Lisa laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. But Daniel wasn't joking, not even a little. He didn't touch her, didn't meet her gaze fully. And then, in that same polished voice he uses to talk to producers when he's pretending to be understanding, he delivered the real blow. Maybe just, don't do that when we're out. Or around my friends or family. You could literally see her face trying to compute the moment. Like, did that just really happen? She wasn't asking for applause. She didn't want a speech. She just wanted to feel safe, showing what's underneath the performance. But instead of being met with love, she was hit with low-key shame. And because Daniel is smart, with words, with optics, with timing, he didn't yell. He didn't insult her directly. He disguised control as concern, disgust as surprise, and a warning as advice. Now here's where things get quieter, but sharper. Lisa started off this season pretty confident. Glamorous. Hair laid. Makeup right. She gave Daniel grace for a lot of things. Him being dismissive, him brushing off her questions, even the weird jokes at her expense. But this hit different. This was personal in another way. Because hair loss, wigs, and insecurities about appearance are not just styling decisions for many women, especially Black women. It's identity, history, trauma, and healing, all tangled together. For Daniel to act like her natural look was something he needed to approve flipped the power dynamic on its head. He tried to dial it back, of course. Added a half-hearted, I'm not saying you're ugly with a shrug so casual it almost made it worse. But he never apologized. Never stopped to ask how it felt for Lisa to take that kind of risk. Because for her, this wasn't just about hair. It was about trust. Later, she sat off camera with one of the producers, swallowing the kind of tears you try to hide when the crying already started. She said, I knew I'd be judged, but I didn't think it'd be him doing it. That moment, unscripted, raw, told the real story. Lisa wasn't embarrassed about her hair. She was humiliated by how little Daniel seemed to care about what it took for her to be real with him. When she came back on screen, her body language changed. Still smiling, still soft-spoken, but there was distance now. She didn't lean into him. She sat back, watched, withdrew just a little, and suddenly every moment before now started to feel different when you replay it. The subtle digs, the strategically placed compliments, the times he skipped over her opinions like she was talking too much. This wasn't about attraction. This was about control, dressed up as taste. And once that curtain drops, it doesn't go back up so easily. Lisa started looking at him differently. So did viewers. And the irony? The only thing off that night was Daniel's reaction. Not Lisa's hair. Not her vibe. Not her choice to be real. What turned things sour wasn't the reveal. It was what got revealed about him. Why would something that bare and honest make someone act like they'd been tricked? It happened in under 10 seconds, but it changed everything. Lisa reached up quietly, no build-up, no drama, and just took off her wig. It was the most human thing. Simple, unfiltered, and for one moment, she looked relieved. free even. But that peace didn't last, not even for a breath. Because the second Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, his whole face changed. The fake smile cracked. His eyes darted away. Then right back again, like he was scanning damage. His jaw clenched. Nothing was said, but everything was said. She saw it. We saw it. And she knew. Then he spoke. Not to reassure her, not to say she looked beautiful or ask how she felt, but to question why she didn't tell him first. Then came the kicker. You should have asked me before doing that, as if her hair, her scalp, her vulnerability needed management approval, as if her natural self required clearance. The temperature in the room dropped so fast it gave viewers whiplash. Lisa laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. But Daniel wasn't joking. Not even a little. He didn't touch her, didn't meet her gaze fully. And then, in that same polished voice he uses to talk to producers when he's pretending to be understanding, he delivered the real blow. Maybe just, don't do that when we're out. Or around my friends or family. You could literally see her face trying to compute the moment. Like, did that just really happen? She wasn't asking for applause. She didn't want a speech. She just wanted to feel safe, showing what's underneath the performance. But instead of being met with love, she was hit with low-key shame. And because Daniel is smart, with words, with optics, with timing, he didn't yell. He didn't insult her directly. He disguised control as concern, disgust as surprise, and a warning as advice. Now here's where things get quieter, but sharper. Lisa started off the season pretty confident, glamorous, hair laid, makeup right. She gave Daniel grace for a lot of things, him being dismissive, him brushing off her questions, even the weird jokes at her expense. But this hit different. This was personal in another way. Because hair loss, wigs, and insecurities about appearance are not just styling decisions for many women, especially Black women. It's identity, history, trauma, and healing, all tangled together. For Daniel to act like her natural look was something he needed to approve flipped the power dynamic on its head. He tried to dial it back, of course. Added a half-hearted, I'm not saying you're ugly with a shrug so casual it almost made it worse. But he never apologized. Never stopped to ask how it felt for Lisa to take that kind of risk. Because for her, this wasn't just about hair. It was about trust. Later, she sat off camera with one of the producers, swallowing the kind of tears you try to hide when the crying already started. She said, I knew I'd be judged, but I didn't think it'd be him doing it. That moment, unscripted, raw, told the real story. Lisa wasn't embarrassed about her hair. She was humiliated by how little Daniel seemed to care about what it took for her to be real with him. When she came back on screen, her body language changed. Still smiling, still soft-spoken, but there was distance now. She didn't lean into him. She sat back, watched, withdrew, just a little. And suddenly, every moment before now started to feel different when you replay it. The subtle digs. The strategically placed compliments. The times he skipped over her opinions like she was talking too much. This wasn't about attraction. This was about control dressed up as taste. And once that curtain drops, it doesn't go back up so easily. Lisa started looking at him differently. So did viewers. And the irony? The only thing off that night was Daniel's reaction. Not Lisa's hair, not her vibe, not her choice to be real. What turned things sour wasn't the reveal. It was what got revealed about him. Why would something that bare and honest make someone act like they'd been tricked? The next morning, Daniel tried shifting the narrative like nothing had happened. He slipped into his usual polished voice, the one that sounds like he's giving a TED Talk on relationships every time he explains himself. This time, his excuse was all about presentation and public settings. According to him, he wasn't trying to be mean, he was just offering guidance. Advice, even. All of this, he claimed, was based on his idea of standards and how couples should represent each other. But the subtext? It was loud. This wasn't about love. It was about control, handed out in polite packaging. Lisa sat there silent at first, nodding, but you could see it in her posture. She was pulling inward, dimming herself down just enough to avoid conflict. And you can't blame her. Because when someone you care about gaslights you gently, it doesn't feel like gaslighting. It feels like you're the problem for being too sensitive. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't call her names. But he didn't let her feelings breathe either. His sentences were laced with phrases like, "you have to understand," or "I'm just being honest," which in toxic relationship language often translates to, "you're not allowed to feel disrespected." He mentioned wanting to help her stay confident by giving suggestions. But when your suggestion list includes rules about wigs, wardrobes, and whose house you can't enter unless you look a certain way, that's not help. That's a soft form of image control. Lisa tried pushing back lightly, bringing up how she's comfortable both with and without the wig. But Daniel cut in before she could finish, pivoting again like a PR rep dodging bad press. "I know it's your choice, babe. I just think mutual respect means we consider how we come across, especially around people who matter." People who matter. That was the phrase that broke the mask. Because who exactly does matter to Daniel? His parents? His friends? Strangers? And where does Lisa fall on that list? At what point did this turn from a relationship to a brand partnership where she's expected to keep up appearances? At one point that afternoon, Daniel casually said he saw lots of women go above and beyond to look good for their partners. And you could see Lisa flinch, just slightly. Because woven into that sentence is the quiet suggestion that anything less is a failure. That her real wasn't enough. That her honesty, her vulnerability, was a problem to be managed, not honored. And the worst part? Lisa tried to justify it to herself. She even told producers she understood where he was coming from. He just wants to make sure we look polished. I get that. But the tone said otherwise. She was convincing herself, because the only thing scarier than being disrespected is realizing you let someone have that much power in the first place. By evening, the shift between them was clear. Lisa started over-explaining her words, fixing her posture constantly, laughing at jokes that didn't land. All the things people do when they're trying to stay emotionally safe. Meanwhile, Daniel kept dropping breadcrumbs of approval and disapproval like he was calibrating the version of Lisa he preferred. It's like watching someone subtly edit another person in real time, cutting, trimming, reshaping until the image fits, not the person. Lisa's confidence, her playfulness, the light energy she brought in earlier episodes, it was fading. Not gone, but dimmed, like she was performing someone else's idea of her, instead of just being. And what makes this more layered is that Daniel framed it all like he was doing her a favor, like these were loving suggestions from a man who sees potential. But where's the line between support and manipulation when affection is always tied to how well you obey the script? So if Daniel's reactions weren't for Lisa, who were they really meant to impress? It started with a DM. Nothing dramatic, just a few lines dropped into Lisa's inbox on a quiet evening. The sender? A woman from the States. Unfamiliar name, but her message, that hit. She said she wasn't trying to start drama or get in Lisa's head, but that she recognized Daniel. Not from TV, from experience. At first, Lisa brushed it off. She'd heard things before. Social media always had something to say. But this was different. The message wasn't just vague warnings and emotional buzzwords. It had timestamps, specific references, stories only someone who'd really been close to him could have known. Same phrases, same controlling tendencies. The slow erosion of self-esteem disguised as helping you look your best. Her telling Lisa the wig thing? Same happened to me. Lisa sat with that for a while. Didn't reply. Didn't even bring it up to Daniel right away. But her perspective shifted instantly. Suddenly, things she once excused started to replay with new clarity. The compliments Daniel gave that felt more like backhanded standards. the way he lightly corrected how she spoke around his friends. The feeling that every vulnerable moment would later be referenced, like a checkbox he used to measure who was in control. She played cool for days, smiled normally, asked questions carefully, but Daniel could sense it. What's wild is how quickly his charm adapted. The warmth got turned up. He started giving more compliments, more touch, more performative affection. On camera especially. He used phrases like, "I'm lucky to have you, and I know I might not always get it right, but I'm learning." Viewers saw the footage, and some even posted online that he seemed like he meant it. But Lisa, sitting next to him, could feel the strategy. He wasn't acting from guilt. He was working from instinct. There's a kind of manipulation that doesn't shout, it smooths, calms, flatters. Daniel's reactions weren't desperate. They were rehearsed. Damage control wrapped in tender words. When Lisa gently brought up the DM without revealing too much detail yet, he didn't panic. He chuckled softly. "Oh man, yeah, I figured that'd happen eventually," as if it was old gossip, as if he'd expected it. Then he leaned into his usual confident tone and said, "That woman's obsessed. She tried everything to keep me. She twists things. You know how people are." Lisa nodded, but something about his certainty this early, it landed wrong. There was no curiosity, no concern about how Lisa felt hearing this. Instead, it became about controlling the image of the messenger, smearing the other woman instead of honestly reflecting on why her warnings sounded familiar. That's when the weight of it all started sinking in. Lisa didn't want to compare notes across trauma timelines, and she wasn't looking for red flags to confirm someone else's story. But it was all clicking in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. Daniel kept painting every doubt she raised as a result of someone else's jealousy, her low confidence outside noise. Which sounds comforting until you realize it's a way to silence the alarm bells going off in your own head. And Lisa had spent weeks turning those alarms into background music. Even the way he held her hand differently after that talk, tighter grip, longer stares, not out of intimacy, but like an effort to re-anchor control. For every reassurance he gave, there was a matching reminder of her emotional overreactions. He made her feel reconsidered instead of reassured, buffered instead of safe. She went back into her messages that night and reread the DM. This time slower, line by line. It was like watching someone else narrate your relationship, and it matched a little too well. Who was this woman really, and how many more might be out there with the same story? Meeting the friends was supposed to ease her nerves. Lisa had convinced herself it would help. Maybe they'd offer context, balance, even pull Daniel out of this weird, overly curated version of himself he'd slipped into. She showed up open, polite, willing to hear stories. But what she walked into felt less like a gathering and more like a PR campaign. Everything was too perfect, too neat. The way they spoke about Daniel, always highlighting his ambition, his loyalty, his sense of humor. It wasn't that the praise felt dishonest, it just felt rehearsed. Like they'd been told how to speak about him in front of certain people. Lisa noticed how quickly certain subjects got spun into safe topics, and how no one ever talked about Daniel's exes unless she specifically brought it up, and even then, she didn't get answers. She got performance. Lisa tried slipping in the question gently. "Have any of you met his past partners?" The energy in the room shifted by a fraction, so subtle an outsider might have missed it. But she caught it. A tense laugh here, a glance exchanged between two friends over drinks, someone suddenly fiddling with their phone. No one outright lied. But no one offered anything real either. One friend shrugged and said, "Yeah, he dated someone from the States way back. Didn't end well. She was, kind of dramatic." That word again, dramatic. It had been used before, by Daniel, when dismissing the American woman who messaged Lisa. Another said, "He doesn't really like bringing up the past. It's not healthy, right?" Lisa nodded, but didn't agree. Because avoiding the past isn't always about healing. Sometimes it's about hiding. What really caught her wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. Everyone kept it light, jokey, positive. Not a single friend mentioned if Daniel had ever been in the wrong. Not once. Not even the smallest anecdote that painted him as flawed. That kind of loyalty isn't normal. It's not human. People mess up, and when you love someone, you don't air their dirt, but you also don't pretend they've never existed outside of perfection. The moment that really cracked the surface came by accident. One of Daniel's female friends, trying to shift the topic, said, "Well, we're just glad this one is turning out better." Lisa blinked. That sentence hung there for a second too long. The room froze just slightly. Daniel shot her a quick glance, then smiled like nothing had happened. But to Lisa, that sentence screamed. Better than what? Turning out better than who? Lisa didn't push. Not then. But the mask was slipping. Because every time she asked a question, the group didn't just protect Daniel, they corrected her vibe, told her not to worry, told her relationships are hard, told her everyone has a past. The tone they used wasn't warm, it was placating. Like they were more concerned with maintaining Daniel's image than connecting with Lisa. There was no curiosity about who she was, where she was from, how she felt about him. It was like everyone had received the same quiet briefing. Be pleasant. Be vague. Follow his lead. Maybe that should have made Lisa feel comforted, that his people had his back. But it didn't. It felt isolating, like being at a table where the food looks great but no one's actually eating. The performance of fun without the substance of trust. Later, when she and Daniel were alone again, she brought it up gently, asked him why none of his friends ever talked about his past openly. He brushed it off, said they respected boundaries, said they just want us to have our own thing. But then he added, "You can't tell some people everything, babe. It gives them ammo." That line hit hard. Ammo? So, were these people his friends or his soldiers? And if they've been trained to protect his image at all costs, what exactly are they protecting him from? When the lies come softly covered in loyalty, who's still telling the truth? And who forgot how? She didn't cry this time. Not when Daniel corrected her about the tone of her voice in front of the waiter. Not when he lightly suggested a different dress for their dinner out. Not even when he hinted that she was too sensitive around his friends, like it wasn't him who made the air cold in the first place. Lisa had crossed some unseen line, the one between questioning and knowing. And once you cross that, there's only your instinct left. No more outsourcing your gut to other people's opinions. No more hoping someone will confirm what you already feel. She started noticing patterns. Not the big blow-ups, there weren't many. Daniel was too polished for that. No, the real erosion came in the details. The way he'd compliment what she wore and then suggest she change. Tell her she was funny, then explain why certain jokes might not land well in public. Every form of affection had terms attached. Every bit of closeness had strings, even if they were invisible. Looking back, Lisa realized control didn't arrive all at once. It leaked into small moments until it drowned everything else. One morning, he made her coffee, placed it gently beside her, kissed her forehead. Then casually said, "You seem brighter with the wig on, by the way. I don't know, it just pulls your whole look together." That's the kind of sentence you can't argue with. It's too polite, too masked. But it stuck. Not because of what it said, but because of how many times he'd said different versions of it. It wasn't about love. It was about branding, and Lisa was done being a project. She didn't confront him, not yet. She didn't throw accusations or demand explanations. Instead, she shifted. Slowly, strategically, the same way he had. Where she once walked on eggshells, she now walked silently. Collected observations instead of fighting to be heard. She started replying with "noted" instead of "I'm sorry." She smiled less during his charm campaigns. Not coldly, but with a distance that didn't need to prove anything. And Daniel noticed. That's the thing about people who spend their energy sculpting control. They always notice when the script starts slipping. He ramped up his attention. More compliments, more gifts, even a softly floated idea about future travel plans. But Lisa didn't bite, because it didn't feel generous. It felt calculated, like a rebrand effort after a scandal. She recognized the strategy for what it was now. Not repentance. Reinforcement. Even in their private conversations, she started testing his stories, referencing small details from the messages, from the evening with his friends, from his past. Whenever something didn't line up, he pivoted, deflected, or just laughed it off, and every time he did, he confirmed more than she ever could have by arguing. That's what emotional clarity does. It makes space for quiet confirmations. And that shift in Lisa didn't come from bitterness. It came from grieving what wasn't real. Because part of her had loved him. Maybe not him exactly, but the story she clung to. The idea of being chosen, cherished, understood. Once she realized that story came with a script written by someone else, she stopped reading her lines. And the silence that followed, that wasn't weakness. That was strength resting before it decides what to do next. She started calling her best friend more, sharing pieces, little red flags she used to explain away that now sounded terrifying when lined up next to each other. The fact that Daniel never really asked her how her day was, unless cameras were on. That he called her his queen, but only if she looked the part. That he didn't care she was exhausted from travel, just that she remembered to recurl her lashes before his friends showed up. The love wasn't fake. Lisa was real. Her vulnerability was real. But Daniel? Day by day, he looked less like a partner and more like someone who needed Lisa to hold up his mask in public and quietly shrink in private. And now, she wasn't shrinking anymore. Because when someone stops trying to be understood, they've already started to leave. Sometimes love doesn't start with trust. It starts with hope. And when you're hoping hard enough, it's terrifying to look at anything that threatens that picture. That's why red flags don't always look red in the beginning. They blend in with charm, with timing, with compliments, and shared playlists and long conversations that feel like fate. You rewrite them in real time. You label control as protectiveness. Dismissiveness becomes confidence. And if it leaves a knot in your stomach, you call it butterflies. Lisa wanted this to work. Not just because she cared about Daniel, but because she finally let herself believe she was safe to care about someone openly again. And when you get there, when you finally trust yourself to open up, the last thing you want to do is start second-guessing every move. So you don't. You edit yourself instead. You tell yourself, he didn't mean it. He's just tired. He's under pressure. He doesn't know how it feels. He's trying in his own way. And worst of all, maybe I'm the problem. That's not love. That's walking on emotional glass. What we don't talk about enough is how emotionally unavailable people often seem like perfection in the beginning. They're polished, controlled, magnetic. They know what to say and when. They listen just enough to feel rare. But when it comes to intimacy, the real kind, they freeze. Because real connection requires vulnerability on both ends. And if someone only wants to know your soft spots so they can manage or manipulate them, they're not connecting. They're surveying. Lisa's desire to be loved wasn't naive. It was brave. She didn't ignore red flags because she was desperate. She ignored them because they were subtle, dressed up as attention and structure and involvement. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't isolate her outright. He used suggestions, tone, image management. He shaped her gently. And when you love someone who quietly conditions your behavior, you don't always realize what you've given up until you can't find your voice anymore. But what makes this painful isn't just the manipulation. It's the shame that follows when you realize it. Because most people don't blame the manipulator. They blame themselves. They wonder how they missed it, how they stayed, how they let things slide. As if seeing clearly is a switch you can flip early on. But that's the design. Subtle control is meant to train you before you have time to notice. And if someone wires your self-worth into their approval, everything they do to unsettle you feels like your fault. Lisa's shift didn't come from rage. It came from that quiet death of doubt, realizing this man who said I love you was also the one making her feel like a burden for showing up as herself. It's not an easy thing to accept that someone can adore your filtered self and still reject your truth. And that hurts worse than cheating. Because when someone betrays you in plain sight, it's clear. But when they betray your safety by slowly asking you to erase yourself, that confusion lingers. Did he ever really care? Was it her hair, or her choice to remove the wig without permission? Was it her presence, or the parts of it that didn't look perfect on camera? Daniel didn't scream threats or slam doors. He didn't need to. He just made it clear, subtly, continually, that love had conditions. And if you didn't meet them, his warmth cooled instantly. That's how people lose themselves. Not through dramatic fights, but through quiet self-abandonment. Through editing words before they speak. Through calculating outfits, reactions, tone, every move. Until the relationship becomes a job and your peace depends on how well you perform. So the real question isn't how Lisa missed the signs. The question is, why are so many people taught that love should have terms to begin with? There wasn't a big blowout. No shouting. No suitcase smashing. No final argument in front of cameras. Lisa didn't need any of that. The real ending already happened, and it was quiet. Just a moment sitting on the edge of the bed, realizing she felt more peace alone in that silence than she ever did next to him in the noise. That was it. The shift didn't come with fireworks, it came with clarity. He was never safe. It wasn't about the wig. It never was. That moment was just the trigger. The truth sat underneath. In all the times Lisa felt she had to shrink or smooth herself to fit into whatever mold Daniel was shaping. From day one, he'd positioned himself as the standard. Smart, polished, articulate, socially savvy. But what Lisa finally saw is that Daniel's whole vibe wasn't about building with someone. It was about building over someone, carefully, with charm, so that no one could blame him for the mess when it fell apart. That moment in the car, the last scene we saw between them, had a different energy. Lisa wasn't looking for his approval anymore. She was listening, not because she needed answers, but because she was watching a man who thought he still had control. She was done explaining, done fixing, done sacrificing pieces of herself to protect his image. She didn't curse him out. She didn't cry. She simply sat back and let the silence hang. That silence held every answer she needed. And in the comments online, people saw it. Viewers who initially thought Lisa was being dramatic had now changed sides completely. She never looked more grounded than when she stopped trying, one fan wrote. Another said, I hope she reads this and knows she didn't imagine any of it. A third fan linked to Daniel's ex's post, pointing out, word for word, how eerily similar the patterns were. Different woman, same tools. That support mattered. It wasn't validation for the sake of ego. It was proof that she wasn't crazy for feeling uncomfortable in moments that looked fine from the outside. And sometimes, that's all survivors of emotional control need. Someone else to say, yeah, that wasn't okay. Lisa's final on-screen confessional hit different too. She didn't name drop, didn't throw shade. She said, simply, I don't want love that asks for parts of me I never offered. That kind of statement doesn't come from anger. That's wisdom rooted in pain and clarity. You could see it in the way she smiled at the end. Not bitter, not broken, just awake. No longer fooled by energy wrapped in sweetness that still tried to dominate what made her whole. Daniel, of course, moved on fast. Tried to clean up his narrative, uploaded a few vague Instagram captions, nothing too direct, but charged just enough to paint himself as misunderstood. But the story was already out. He didn't get canceled, he just exposed himself. because the most dangerous kind of manipulation leaves few obvious scars. But once someone names it, and enough people see it, it can't hide behind good English and a pressed shirt anymore. Lisa didn't stay for revenge. She stayed long enough to make sure she was seeing things clearly and left when her piece said it was time. Not everyone gets loud closure. And honestly, they don't need it. Sometimes closure comes when you stop arguing with your own gut. Sometimes peace is quieter than the apology you'll never get. And this wasn't the end of her story at all. It was the start of one she finally gets to write on her own terms. You thought this was about wigs? Please. This was about control, shame, and learning how to unhook your worth from someone else's standards. And if you want to see how that same pattern shows up in another cast member's relationship, especially when the mask starts to slip, click through to the next story.